But thank you. As you know, this is the third in a series of presentations. Father George gave our first presentation on Blessed William Joseph Chaminade on May the 1st. Then we took a little pause because of Mother Nature, and then Father Sean Downing spoke on Marie Therese de la Marousse. And I will continue that journey of our founders with Blessed Adele de Batz de Tranquellon. So there's a theme to the talk tonight, and the theme is a word. And I'm going to give you the word. And we're just going to pause for a moment of silence and just to reflect quietly on your personal reaction to this word. And everybody has the same word.
Oh, okay.
So our word this evening is the word connection. And that will be the theme, the running thread, as we look at the life and the journey of Blessed Adele de Batz de Tranquellon. But before we enter into that journey, I want to do a few personal reflections with you. I had the honor and the privilege of being in both Spain and India this past month. And the word connection very much is at the heart of my experience on that trip. So let's start with Spain. The opportunity to visit some of our Marianist schools, but what was most important for me was the opportunity to visit the Cathedral Basilica of Our Lady of the Pillar. To be in the space where Blessed Chaminade had the inspiration to go back to France. A connection, our word, that he felt within himself while in Spain, and a connection to his people who just experienced and were still experiencing a revolution, all those miles apart. And that connection was so strong that it inspired him to return and to begin a journey that is the reason why we're all here today. And Father George went into great depth about that journey of Blessed William Joseph Chaminade. And then I traveled to India. The purpose of that trip, and there were 15 of us from the United States that attended this momentous assembly, historic assembly, because just over 40 years ago, a small group, very small group of Marianist brothers entered the country of India, a country that has a very, very, very small population of Christians, in an effort to implant the Marianist charism. And something that I became very aware of is the connection of our Marianist charism to all facets of the world, regardless of country, culture, distance, whatever it might be. And the connection that I felt with our Indian brothers was very deep and very strong. Even though our life experiences are vastly different, there was a connection that was grounded in our love of Mary and our love for Jesus and our love of the Marianist charism. And so they have been a member of the province of the United States all of these years as a district, and this gathering was a celebration where they were becoming an independent region. That they are now able to, if you will, stand on their own. And the connections of gratitude that we heard during the entire assembly of the Indian brothers toward the brothers from the United States was quite moving. The stories that were told. Stories that on some level might seem quite ordinary, but in fact extraordinary. Extraordinary connections between the lives of these brothers in India with our brothers in the United States. So I left there with a great sense of hope. In so many ways, they embody and animate the mission of the Marianists in our world. When I was there for the first time 4 years ago, I thought I had experienced poverty working for years in inner city Baltimore. I thought I had seen poverty. Nothing prepared me for what I would encounter. But some of the happiest people that I ever met in the midst of those circumstances, and the connections that our brothers make into the lives of these people that they serve is extraordinary, with very limited resources. Very limited resources. So I left with great hope for their future. Will it be a challenge for them? Yes. Is it a challenge for us? Yes. Is it a challenge for Merck? Yes. But in faith, we go forward, remaining connected to that faith and to our belief that God will provide us with what we need. God will provide us with what we need. So another quick story of connection before we begin our journey with Adele. Any mathematicians among us? I see panicked shakes of no. Well, let me tell you the story of a teacher, a high school teacher, who had one student in her social studies class that was just giving her a hard time. I mean, just giving her a hard time. And so she gave him detention. And he had to come to school, back to school at the end of the day, for 1 hour. So the teacher began to reflect, how am I going to keep him busy for 1 hour? So the teacher said to him when he arrived, here's some paper. I want you to add the numbers 1 to 500 and then give me the total. So add 1 plus 2, get that, plus 3, plus 4, plus 5, plus 6, keep going. Down the road, plus 262, 200, take a long time. So she thought, this is great, I got my hour. About 10 minutes later, he walks up and hands her the paper, and she says, what's this? And he said, I did what you asked me to do. And at the bottom of the paper it said 125,250. And she looks, and that was the total. And she said, "How did you get that so fast?" And he said, "Well, as I analyzed the numbers, I realized that if you take the number 1 and the number 500, it adds up to 501. The number 2 and 499 adds up to 501. 3 and 498, 501. There are 250 pairings of 501. So he took 501, multiplied it by 250, 125,250. Connection. This was a young man whose mind worked in such a way that he was able to see the connection between numbers in a way that I couldn't. I mean, I think I'm fairly good in math. I never could have done that. But the ability to connect numbers in such an intricate way to get that answer. And in life, we are all gifted with various talents that allow us to make connections in a variety of fields. Doctors, nurses, carpenters, connecting pieces of wood to create furniture. But tonight, we're here to reflect on spiritual connection. How gifted are we in making spiritual connections? So today is about deepening our connection to God. Just as that high school student could see the intricate connection of numbers, so too are we called this evening to see the intricacies of our relationship with God as it relates to our lives and the world today in 2024. Are we able to connect the facets of our lives to God, to make those connections? Are there connections that already exist with God and others of which perhaps we are not even aware of? And tonight, we will reflect on the life of one of our Marianist founders, Blessed Adele de Batz de Tranquellon. For she was a woman who made spiritual connections that allowed her to grow in her faith. And she was able to make these connections because she was able to look at life always through the eyes of faith. Adele had the faith of a child, simple, humble, and without deviation. She maintained that disposition all the way to her death. A life of prayer, meditation, and service allowed her to see what God's plan was for her life. Adele once said, God has certain designs, and it is up to us to penetrate them. And it is there that we will find a great means of growth. So let's look more closely at the life of Adele, not as some historical exercise, but rather to see her life as a reflection of our own lives. A desire to see with the eyes of God and to see the connections around us that allow us to grow in faith. Adele was born in 1789 into a wealthy, land-owning, aristocratic family in France. Her father went into exile in London when she was 2 years old because of his political philosophy during the French Revolution. And he would be gone for 10 years. So it was Adele's mother, the Baroness, who devoted her life to her children. Adele learned from her mother what it meant to live a life of faith. Her mother taught Adele the importance of connecting. And there's that word again, connection. The importance of connecting to the entire world, to people beyond her wealthy, aristocratic world, namely the poor and the sick. Her mother bridged two worlds, the life of the rich and the life of the poor. Adele's mother taught her at a very young age the virtue of mercy. It was about seeing the world through God's eyes, seeing them as though they were part of a family, visiting, caring for the sick, sharing food and clothing, and selling jewelry to help them. Mercy, I heard once described as choosing not to ignore someone when it's in one's power to do so. Choosing not to ignore someone when it's in one's power to do so. Adele's mother taught Adele not to ignore the poor and the sick. She was taught as a child to see the world through God's eyes, which meant seeing them, seeing all people. At the age of 8, Adele and her family exiled to Spain and later to Portugal to escape persecution. During those years, her mother continued to guide her children in faith, both Adele and her brother. Adele learned to be disciplined and joyful in the service of others. She finally saw for the first time in Spain what the experience was of living your faith freely and with joy, openly, without fear. Adele's mother indeed shaped her world. So is there someone in your life journey that shaped your world and shaped who you have come to be this day, in 2024. It was Adele's mother who shaped her world. Reflect quietly for a moment. Who is a person in your journey of life who shaped your world? And after we pause for a short bit, we'll pair up into 3 dyads and share with our partner what we're thinking. Who's someone that contributed to shaping your world, shaping your life?
Father who just died, his wife.
So how about under an abbreviated Reader's Digest form, we just briefly share, maybe with a sentence or 2 after, why you chose the person that you chose to talk about. So Barb, you want to go first?
I chose my mom, Louise. She had 13 children, and she had an alcoholic husband who died young, and then she had a lot of kids to raise after he died, and I just watched her perseverance and her faith. There's a funny story about the house really gets clean and all the prayers get done before the drunk comes home. I would see her even do ironing, saying a rosary, and but we were going to get through every day, and we did. There's some days you didn't know how, but we were going to. So her perseverance and her strength in the faith really taught us a lot at the house there, being both taking the role on as a father and mom.
Nice, thank you. Jen?
Mine was my grandma, Klein, my mom's mom. Her name's Velma. She was just the most loving, caring, kind person. She never met a stranger. There wasn't anything she wouldn't do for anyone to help them, to make them feel comfortable and fed and loved. And she taught me to do the same.
Nice. George?
I immediately came to one of our priests, who was a real mentor of mine. His name is Jack McGrath. A person who could be direct and sometimes seemingly brusque, but very, very honest, very straightforward. And the thing that influenced me was, I think he could see things in me that I couldn't see myself, and brought those out. So that was a huge influence for me.
For me, one of the first people that came into my mind, there were several of course, but is a gentleman named Billy Patty. And Billy Patty was just loved the Lord and had this trust in God, that I was telling Father George here that his pastor said, I want you to start a youth group. And Billy said, I'll pray about it. And Billy actually prayed about it for 2 years before he started a prayer group for teenagers. And he opened his house every Wednesday night for 12 years to teenagers. Many of the Wednesday nights he wasn't there. Now, can you imagine, really, like opening your house to dozens of teenagers when you're not there? I mean, and this was before protecting God's children and all that stuff. You know, you couldn't get away with that these days, but he just trusted Jesus, and he always had candy and soda available, and teens would show up, and a lot of the young people who showed up there really have become very strong leaders in the church. But he just had an open heart and an open home, and yeah, trusted God with all of his heart.
His name was Billy?
Billy Patty.
And the name of his teenager group?
The name of the teenage group was God's Gang.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, God's Gang. I jokingly say our slogan was, you mess with us, we'll pray for you. How about you, Brother Jesse?
Yeah, I went into the avenue of, and I have countless examples, one of whom is with us today, but I shared about Father Pat Tonry. And he just modeled for me what it meant to live a joyful life. and a life of hope. And someone who always made you feel better about yourself when you were with him. And that's a great gift. So like Adele's mother, who had a deep connection in Adele's life, and Louise, who had a deep connection in the life of Barb and those other 12 children, and Velma, who had that deep connection in the life of her grandmother, and Father Jack McGrath, who you couldn't have said it better. I have such love and admiration for him, and Billy, and that connection that he discerned for 2 years with young people, and then the connection I feel with Father Pat around joy. So continuing the story, in 1801, the family returned to France under safer conditions. When Adele attended a retreat in preparation for her confirmation, she met the person who would become her dearest lifelong friend, Jean Dechet. Guided by Adele's spiritual director, these two women began what was called the Association of Spiritual Prayer, Mutual Support, and Works of Mercy in 1804. This group would eventually have 200 members, spanning geographically in France the size of Ohio. Separated by distance, but connected by faith, like those brothers in India. In 1808, when Adele was 19, she entered into correspondence by letter with William Joseph Chaminade, because of a connection made by someone they both knew. He was engaged in similar work as Adele. Chaminade led the Sodality in Bordeaux, and Adele continued to lead her association. Both were active in education, religious instruction, and works of mercy. And their bishop loved them, which always helps. 2 years later, they would meet for the first time in 1810. Chaminade had always dreamed of beginning a religious order for both women and men. He now had the partner of his dreams to assist him in fulfilling that dream. A woman and a man brought together by their faith. It was clearly the work of God's hand. Clearly the work of God's hand. Reflect for a moment in your life when something happened. And maybe in the midst of it, you didn't know this, but as you looked back, you realized that God's hand was in that moment. And when I say moment, it could be a particular place, a particular time of day, a particular circumstance where you looked and said, God's hand was in that place, in that circumstance. So we'll do the sharing a little differently this time. We will not get into a group. Let's pause for a moment quietly, and then when someone is able to share, a moment when they knew God's hand was present, just as Chaminade and Adele knew that God's hand was working something in their lives. Why were they brought together? Why this connection? That God was doing something. They didn't know fully yet what it was going to become, but that God was working. Let's reflect on a moment in our own lives when that happened. Anybody would like to share?
And if whoever shared, if they could possibly go up to where Brother Jesse is and use the microphone, please, so that people can hear a little bit better, please. Okay.
Show us how to do
Mine's
it.
pretty easy. It's great.
So back in 2009, I was a grade school, middle school language arts teacher, and my school was closing, St. Martin of Tours in Lehman. And one of the last afternoons of the school year, it was the middle of May, I got a message. This goes back on my answering machine from Bridget Timoney from Bishop DeBerg High School. Never met her, hadn't thought of, I mean, I'd thought of Bishop DeBerg, but I hadn't been by there. She said, I heard that you're a really good teacher, and we have a position here that would actually be kind of middle school math, and if you're certified through 9th grade, you'll be fine. I'd like to talk to you. So I went in and met with her. Immediately felt at home the minute I walked in the door. Said yes, and I started teaching at Bishop DeBerg. While I was at Bishop DeBerg, I got involved with the campus ministry and eventually became the campus minister. During that time, I met Paul Masick doing retreats for the REAP team with our freshmen and developed a friendship with him. Fast forward to 2021, when I felt a calling to go deeper with my faith and with my career. I just happened to see something that Paul had posted from the Marianist Retreat Center. We came out here with Bishop DeBerg for our seniors and juniors for their retreats. So I was very familiar and loved this place. So the hand of God moved me right along the way with people I had no idea what he was doing or how he was doing it. I met with Paul. I emailed him and said, hey, I heard about this opening. Could you send me the information? And he said, hey, good to hear from you. Yes. Sent me the information. Just so happened that January, I was out here for a retreat with Bishop DeBerg. And Jared said, can I interview you for this position here, this hospitality position? You're gonna be here anyway. I said, sure. So during break time, I went in and talked with both of them. Easiest interview I've ever been on. I felt so comfortable and so at home. And I was offered the position before I even left retreat. And now here I am doing what I love at a place I love. And when I look back, God's hand was there. But it started with that one phone call from Bridget to me back in the day.
Yeah, he knows what he's doing, I guess.
So I went to Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas, and I thought the Lord might be calling me to be a monk. So I joined the postulancy at St. Benedict's Abbey. I didn't stay there very long, but upon coming back to St. Louis, I knew that I needed a spiritual director. So I reached out to a priest here in the St. Louis area, Father Dave Rock, and I asked him if he would be my spiritual director. And he said, I can't answer that question right now. I have to ask you a question first. I said, okay, what's the question? He said, well, I am the director of the Catholic Charismatic Renewal Office here in St. Louis, and we've been talking, and we would like to hire you to figure out how to reach young people. And if you say yes to that, I can't be your spiritual director and your boss at the same time. So I mean, this was back in the day, okay, but they offered me like $5,000 a year for a part-time job and benefits, and I was stupid enough to say yes. Or maybe the Holy Spirit was moving me to say yes, or maybe it was both. But yeah, because of that, I started working in youth ministry, and I didn't really know what I was doing, and they didn't know what I was doing, and they just said, we want you to figure it out. So that's kind of a weird job description, like figure it out. So I started trying to figure it out, doing retreats and talks here and there. Went to a charismatic conference in Indianapolis, and I ran into an old friend, and he said, what are you doing? I'm like, blah, 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 here's what I'm doing. I'm trying to figure it out. He goes, well, have you been trained well? And I said, I don't know, like, probably not. He said, well, I think you should come to training with Net Ministries. We can train you. You don't have to join the ministry, but we can train you. And it wouldn't be very expensive. So I just went back, and St. Louis asked Father Dave. He's like, sure, we'll send you. So I went for 3 weeks to St. Paul, Minnesota to be trained how to do retreat work with Net Ministries with no intention of serving with Net Ministries, and I never did. But it was while I was there, I remember I was praying on the beach, not really beach, but on the rocky shore of a lake. And I thought the Lord said to me pretty clearly what Net does on a national level, doing retreats throughout the United States, that could happen in St. Louis. It's a Catholic enough town. And so through that, I think the Lord called me to start the REAP team, which I directed for over 30 years. And when that kind of faded, it kind of morphed into the ministry of the MORE team, which is happening right now. But so much of it, like the focal point, 2 focal points of conversion, like was meeting with Father Dave, and just Father Dave offering me a job, not knowing what he wanted me to do, but just he was moving in faith. And then running into my friend at a conference who's like, yeah, you need to be trained with these people. So had no idea what God was doing at the time, but it really formed, I would even say launched my career into what I'm doing now.
Growing up, I went to a public elementary school because we had moved from Brooklyn, New York to Long Island, and we moved right across the street from a public school. And so even though most of the kids on the block went to the Catholic school, my father said, well, we didn't move here right across the street, you go to this school. So went to a public school, have absolutely no regrets at all. I had wonderful teachers, a wonderful education, and in the 8th grade, I had a woman who was a devout Catholic. She had taught my brother, so she knew our family. And she lived providentially across the street from Chaminade High School in Mineola, New York, which is the Marianist high school, still is the Marianist high school. And she said to me in the 8th grade, she said, you should apply. So I applied. I applied to a number of schools. One of them was the military academy, which is beyond my imagination to think of me in a military academy. So I applied and was accepted to Chaminade High School, but my parents couldn't afford the tuition. The tuition was $30 a month. So this teacher then very kindly said, well, I'm gonna take you to the principal and see if he can do anything for you. So she hauled me, by her own initiative, hauled me off to the principal and sat me down and pleaded a case for me. And the principal said, well, we can arrange for half tuition. So reluctantly, my parents said they could manage that. Now you think of all this, you know, I mean, how is God leading me to a Marianist school? And I was there for a couple of years and was part of a sodality and a vocation club, and then was asked, what do you think about becoming a Marianist? And you know, I don't know, I'm a sophomore in high school. Yeah, I think it sounds like a good idea. So then off I was. After my sophomore year, much to my parents' chagrin, but they didn't oppose it, and here I am. You know, how many years later, and I always think of that was God's hand somehow, you know, leading me to those particular situations, and especially for that teacher who was a wonderful, wonderful woman.
What was the question again? I think when you were talking, it just struck me, the connection for God with me suddenly one night. For 19 years, I worked at St. John's Mercy in the trauma center at the front door of the ER. We're level 1 trauma center in St. Louis County, the only one. So I always said we got the bad, the worst, the ugliest, just very traumatic. One night we had a hayride accident by a brownie troop. As a paramedic said, their worst nightmare, dark, unconscious, many victims. We lost a 9-year-old girl that night named Kelly. And we were a tough crew out of that triage desk. We had to keep going. You did not have time to, you just kept going. The press was there, it was just a crazy wild night. We were waiting for the mom to come. The mom came to the door and I was her first face. The mom reached over and just said, would you pray with me? I said, God, I've never done this before. I've never had anybody ask me to pray like this. How do I do this? We went to our knees there on the floor in the emergency room. It was surreal. There were people running around us taking care of all the victims, but Barb and Kelly's mom were on the floor kneeling and praying. That was my last night in the ER. I knew God gave me a reason to be there, but I was done. I did not understand that. The next day, the head of trauma called me and asked me to come work in his office, so I knew I was taken care of job-wise. But I still remember that mom looking at me and feeling the comfort to ask me to pray. I knew her daughter was deceased. I could not say that because I'm not a doctor. I'm not in the medical category to release that information. Then they put me, later on that evening, I went to the phone to talk to the dad to try to get him to the hospital without telling him his daughter was deceased. It has always struck me There's a thing called debriefing we would do after these major incidents, and I was debriefed twice, but it didn't work. And I knew that. And I knew God was saying, it's okay, you've done your job, and I can move on to another area and still stay with St. John's Mercy and work for the nuns. So most of you in this room know that led up to when our daughter was killed. I went to the ER, and I saw the girl look at me across the desk, and that's all I needed to see. I knew that sign, I knew that silence, I knew those eyes, and I knew God knew He could tell me it was okay. So that's my story.
When I was teaching in Baltimore, one day after school, I was on my way home and stopped at the CVS very close to school because my allergies, like tonight, by the way, were driving me crazy. And I went into the CVS and I was in the wrong part of the store, but because of that, I bumped into a student that I had taught 5 years prior. And he knew me right away, I knew him right away. And people are around, you really can't talk. And I said, stop by school one day. And I'm thinking he's never going to do that. Sure enough, it was the next week that he came to school. I happened to be free at the time that he came, and I told the secretary, have him come up to the 3rd floor. So he came up. And I taught all my classes in a prayer room. So he came in and sat in the prayer room with me, and I said, I'm so happy that you came. And he didn't say anything. And we sat down, and he just started sobbing. And I'm like, okay, I'll give him his space. And I said, well, when you're ready, if you want to talk, then I'm here to listen to you. And after he got his composure, he said to me, I think that I'm gay. And then he went on to tell me that his parents wanted him to leave the house. And when we think about this word connection, how God's hand is in circumstances, you're walking in a CVS for allergy medicine, a student that I taught 5 years ago. None of the stories that we told are coincidence, they're the hand of God. Just as the hand of God touched Chaminade and Adele on their journey. Adele had always felt that her life had a destiny. Her relationship with Chaminade helped her to see it. There was no doubt in Adele's mind that God had chosen her for his spouse. By 1814, Adele and Chaminade knew they would work together to form this religious institute under the protection of Mary. She first took her vows privately under the name Sister Marie of the Conception and called her fellow members the Daughters of Mary. Then, early one morning in the spring of 1816, Adele and 3 of her companions left before daybreak to avoid the painful goodbyes and slipped away quietly and courageously from the chateau. A final glance at the charming setting that had sheltered her birth and youth. and Adele had broken her ties with family and the world. Adele, the born leader, inspired by her mother, had become a mature and enthusiastic shepherdess of numerous brothers and sisters in an abandoned countryside, was now Mother Marie of the Conception. These first sisters took their vows on July 25th, 1817. Adele died at the age of 38 of tuberculosis. And what we would consider a short life here on earth, she created valuable connections of faith for the women and men of her time. And these many years later, those connections continue to occur through the life and witness of the Marianist sisters throughout the world. So I have a handout here that I'm going to read for the folks that are watching on video. And these would be 3 questions that in your own personal prayer time you could reflect on. Question 1. What did you hear in Adele's story that inspired you? Question 2. Mercy is choosing not to ignore someone when it is in one's power to do so. Is there an individual or a group of people you have chosen to ignore in your own life? And number 3, is there a connection you could make in your life today that would help you to grow in your faith? A new connection. Perhaps it's a connection that would require you to step out of your box, a box reflecting what I'm accustomed to, what I'm used to, places I'm used to going to. Is there a connection God might be calling you to step out of that box, like Adele did, out of that aristocratic world, so that she could encounter the vulnerable in this world? So for those watching on video, I would encourage you to reflect on those 3 questions in your personal prayer. What in Adele's life touched you? Is there a person or a group in this world that you have chosen to ignore? And is there a new connection that you could create in your life?